Hey everybody, it's Joe Trippi, and welcome back to That Trippi Show with my co-host, Alex Sashlow. This week, Trump had another beautiful phone call, this time with Putin. Also, with Elon and Trump hard at work attempting to destroy just about everything in their way, and that means democracy. How are we supposed to communicate that to voters? We've got some new polling that may show some of the way. Plus, I know this question has been on everyone's minds for a while. What should we be fighting for? Alex, where do you want to get started?
Let's start with some news that's breaking when we were recording and kind of going through the rundown, which again, some people may be confused to hear, but we actually do have a run of show that we occasionally follow. You're better at it than I am. Pete Hegseth has been all over the news this morning, Secretary of Defense, calling Ukraine's peace goals, quote, unrealistic, unquote, to NATO, by the way, not just the press conferences, made it clear Ukraine's not getting NATO membership, which we all knew wasn't going to happen with this administration, but they're also not getting their land back. To tie that all in, we did get a bunch of listener questions this week. This one's from Hannah in D.C., just started right off. Are we buying that Trump's going to end the war in Ukraine? He's bragging about it on Truth right now. I'm just scared about whatever he and Tulsi, who also got confirmed, I believe, this morning as we're recording this, are giving away to Putin right now. Joe, what the hell's going on with Ukraine?
Let's look at the Hexa thing for a minute. This is like so incompetent. It's not funny. I mean, so take away motive of giving Putin everything he wants. I mean, getting to Hannah's question about what she suspects Trump's up to, and we all can buy into that. But think about this for a second. You're about to enter negotiations for a peace agreement, for a ceasefire, something that stops all this, right? And what are the best leverage positions that the administration and, by the way, Zelensky would have? The threat of joining NATO, the threat of wanting to, all the cards, literally all the cards that would be leverage in that negotiation with Putin, even if it's just to trade it later on. No, but to trade it later on. Oh, in exchange for getting this, we will promise that they won't be, there's no path to NATO. No, instead you start the whole thing off by giving every single piece of leverage that you have in the negotiations away. Why? And this is why the whole problem of someone who's never been there, can't lead this organization, hasn't been part of these kinds of negotiations. And this is why his experience, of course, honoring his service, et cetera, that's one thing. But that service had nothing to do with preparation for this job. And whether this is motivated in terms of trying to undermine Zelensky from the get-go, or whether just incompetence and inexperience and by the way, I would even argue if you are going to undermine Zelensky in Ukraine, not being this obvious about it, so that shows incompetence in terms of how they're doing it. But I really think fundamentally, if you just take them at, okay, they're trying to, this is a new administration and the new Secretary of Defense is trying to posture for the negotiations that are on that call. Trump said, we're going to start them immediately, the talks to build an agreement. The incompetence of basically saying out loud right now what you're going to deal away is that alone is an out in the open gift to Putin, because he comes into those negotiations knowing there's no path to NATO membership, that they're not going to, he doesn't have to worry about U.S. being there with Ukraine, retaking some of the territory they've lost, any of that stuff. That's off the table. So it's a complete gift to Putin. And I think it's all three. Incompetence and inexperience on Hexeth's part, probably matched by the true intention of what Trump was telegraphing from the beginning, that Putin was going to fare far better than Zelensky in Ukraine. If there is some agreement, the one thing I think everybody's really a lot, particularly I think on the U.S. side, and I mean this across the board with a lot of even Ukraine allies of Ukraine and U.S. who are sort of, hey, this can't continue, it's got to stop. There's going to have to be some kind of negotiated agreement. I think just totally underestimate or do not understand where the Ukrainian people are having you and I've been there, and we're on the ground there, and I think the more it's one thing for Hegseth and Trump to try to give this stuff away. It's another thing to whether the Ukrainian people will actually would rather keep fighting than sign on to an agreement that puts them under the thumb of Putin. That's going to be a very and Zelensky had that's the I think the balance that he's got to consider, but he's got his people, I think, as his backstop, and that may be what makes this go on for a lot longer than people think. I don't think this is going to happen overnight the way Trump, thinks I can do it in a day.
Well, and then you factor in the rest of Europe, who's obviously got a much more vested interest in this, just in terms of proximity. You're wondering who's next.
But Hegseth said today that European security is not part of the equation.
For him, yeah. But for Europeans, it very much is.
But that's another thing you're taking off the table. This is what I'm saying. It's like, even if that's what you're going to do, don't say it out loud.
He walked into that conference, announced to the world he had a 2 and a 7, showed everybody the cards, and then just proceeded to attempt to play.
He told everybody he had 3 aces, but he threw them into the pile and wanted to draw, and then he drew a 2 and a 7. It's what he's doing. It's I'm sorry, I shouldn't do the poker analogy, but it's just bizarre. Again, it shows why so many opposed him.
You want someone who has some grasp of the job, right? I mean, this is like that whole the best people thing. And we've talked about this.
You're right, some grasp of the job, and this just demonstrates that he has none, and I just think, again, when you say things like, that European security is not going to be part of this, and by the way, if there is security for Ukraine, it has to come from Europe, but there's no NATO for Ukraine. I mean, the whole thing, if you actually walk through it, is just more chaos, more gobbledygook, and also comes from somebody who does have no grasp for the job.
We've talked about this kind of obliquely before, and I know we've talked about it off air, but there's this idea that, and what's really scary about all this is you look at who's in charge right now. You look at everybody, including the people who now have the reins of the bureaucracy, and they're ripping it apart. There's going to be no institutional memory left whatsoever. So let's game this out. So we're going to have 4 years of chaos. Knock on wood, if we pull this together and somehow figure out how to get Democrats back in the Oval in 2028, and knock on wood again, we figure out how to get a transition of power, because I'm not convinced any of these assholes are going to give it up. We're now in 2029 through 2032. Democrats are in charge. Let's say another Republican who's not Trump decides in the mid 2030s to mount a presidential run, runs and wins. The last time that any Republican who actually cared to govern or do any of the implementation of the U.S. government on any scale was the George Bush era, over 25 years before. That should truly terrify anybody who's out there and listening to this. That is an entire generations, 2 entire generations. You and I know how federal jobs work. That is essentially a career and a half for a lot of these people. That is terrifying to think of.
Well, we've talked about this before. I mean, the incoming administration is always basically populated by people from a past administration. I mean, in other words, Obama wins. That's why a lot of the people who were lesser, assistant secretaries or whatever in the Clinton administration, they become part of.
He retained Bob Gates. He retained Bush's defense secretary.
That's been the way. Then you have Trump come in 2016, as you point out, and basically offs everybody. Sort of guardrails are understood how government worked. They're all purged and gone. Biden administration, again, made up of a lot of former Clinton, former Obama, and some new folks, but basically that's what that was. And so you're right. He's now purged everybody, including a lot of civil servants who will be sent home, packing or disrupted or just leave, retaining the worst people in the government. by doing it the way they're doing it. The best will take the buyout and go make money in the private sector. The worst that just want the job, just want the paycheck and kind of like mope around all day doing not a whole lot. The exact people he supposedly wants to get rid of will stay and keep taking the paycheck. So my point is here that what's happening, and your point is that, yeah, but forget about it's already there, because even if anybody, any Republican who wants to govern wins, they are already today that far back to Bush in 2025. Certainly the Democrats, again, if we get it back in 2028, then you have a different situation, but you'll never be able to get back that experience and the best that are being kicked out of civil service now, being kicked out of these departments at a lower, at the other levels. That's going to take a long, long time to fix, no matter who wins in 2028. I mean, assuming somebody on their side wants to fix it, but as we hope a Democrat wins in 2028, there will be a lot of repair work because the damage is already done. You see this already now with the economy and with the number of people that you don't know whether they were bought out or not, whether they accepted the buyout, or whether they're having accepted it, they're going to get fired and not be able to return when it turns out that that the buyout wasn't constitutional anyway. It's all crazy.
You mentioned this at the top, and I want to get to this. It's one of probably my favorite listener questions we've had in a while. It got me thinking. So you mentioned at the top, we know what we're fighting against, but what should we be fighting for? And I think that's a question Democrats have been asking quite a bit, and really tease up the rest of this show. A very brief diversion, and this is a lot of old English, so I'm just going to summarize. But my wife actually sent me a letter that John Adams sent to the Massachusetts militia in 1798. There's a passage I can't get out of my head, but the short of it is, passions unbridled by morality and religion would break the strongest cords of our Constitution as a whale goes through a net. What he basically says in that letter is that the success of America, the success of the Constitution, depends on, he puts it, the moral character of its citizens. But basically, the U.S. Constitution was crafted with the understanding that the people would be like decent. And so my question, Joe, and this gets to this reader question, this is from Sam in Pennsylvania. What are we supposed to fight for now? Seems like we're stuck in respond to Trump mode again.
Well, first of all, when you read that the John Adams quote, you've got to understand that MAGA reads that we're the people that are not moral and are the inadequate citizens to uphold the moral values of the country, and vice versa. One is you could read that quote to Trump supporters and they would say, yeah, John Adams was right. It's the pedophile Democrats, trans loving, whatever. The whole idea of common citizenship is, been so poisoned, and now it's infecting everything and everyone. And so, there really is no empathy for someone who doesn't believe like as you do. And that's happened on the left as well. You see a Trump supporter in a MAGA hat, there's very little empathy, to open up your heart to hearing what are they upset about? What is it that we can try to find together, and vice versa, big time the other way. So we can talk about, trying to, one of the things we got to fight for is coming together. We should all try, but no, what I think is clear is that we are in a race right now, a race probably between now and 26. They're in a race to destroy as much as they can and probably to impact negatively voting rights, voter rolls, things like that, in an attempt to finish this off and can keep all three, the House and the Senate. Obviously, the presidency won't be up in 26, but keep all of it. And if they do, I think whether 2028 is a real race for the White House or frankly, just a a kind of like, yeah, we quote sort of had democracy, but it looked like it was an election, but it was, truly rigged. That's the race that they're in. The thing we have to do, I think, and the fight we're in is for democracy. Okay, that's great. What's that mean? Well, it means obstructing, disrupting, putting sand in the gears. It means standing up, as Schatz and others have started to do, and say, no, I'm holding up every nominee until till USID is you let go of that. It is every lawsuit that's out there, every legal challenge that's possible. Yes, make them do the appeals. That was the first good sign that they've actually said they would appeal some of these challenges and not just ignore them. Although there's some questions about that too from one judge, the one in Rhode Island, which we can get to. But my point is, we have to slow, they're a freight train speeding with their mission. And it's clearly to destroy as much of as they can and to erode Democrats enough of the voting, whether it's demoralizing, whether it's changing rules, whether it's redrawing lines, whatever. They're going to do everything they can to hold the House in 2026. We have to obstruct, disrupt, sand in the gears, and everything we got. And that's, like I said, legal challenges. It's AGs filing legal challenges. It's governors in blue states where we have juice basically becoming major challenges to any of the sort of nationalized crap. I mean, remember, Trump was a big states' rights thing. No, okay, what's the rights of these states? Assert them. At the same time, Congress, particularly the Senate, has to use its power. There is not a lot of it, but there is enough to disrupt and slow things down. That's what we have to do. Why? And then, while that's all going on, we all have to put all our petty, and I mean petty, inter-party differences aside, including being upset with a Liz Cheney or an Adam Kinzinger or anybody who we may disagree on a bunch of different things, but we all agree we've got to win these House seats back to have a chance at preserving democracy. So look, it's a midterm. It's going to be a midterm. We all know it. There's always a good chance that the midterms work against the party in power with Trump. That's happened the last few times, and his people don't turn out the way that they do when he's on the ballot. We have to, and we can't spread our money and our time to 435. No, we got to figure the 20 or so seats and all of it. And that includes recruiting the right candidates who fit those districts and getting behind even if it's not your flavor of the Democratic Party, but it's somebody with a real fighting chance to win a marginal district. That's where we need to put our time and money and effort so that what we've done, we slow this thing down. We put as many brakes on them as we can. Raise your voices, protest, peaceful protest, anything that slows up, that gains attention to what they're doing, slows them down. And then focus on 2026, because if we take the House back in 2026, and they only have it by 3 or 4 seats, if we take it back, then then the brakes are on. I mean, that doesn't mean he won't do unconstitutional, extraordinary things to try to stay in power, as you point out, Alex, and as 2028 comes along. But we have a much better chance of the courts holding, including the Supreme Court, and of breaking this if we can slow it down, put the brakes on, win in 2026 the seats that we need to win to take a majority in the House. And with that majority in the House and further disruptions and disruptors in the Senate, and frankly, that may mean this is something that's not going to. Somebody's got to say it, and people are starting to. I think Murphy has in the Senate. I think we got to change our leadership. I think Chuck Schumer needs to. Your senators need to hear, hey, we need a changing of the guard and someone who gets what this fight is about.
So I'm glad you went here. There there was a story that came out today, and this is another thing we got emails about. But basically, there's a lot of tension right now from groups like Move On, Indivisible. The Axios story points out there's huge tension with grassroots Democrats and congressional leadership, and all the kind of grassroots are feeling like there is a leadership vacuum, and they're like, you got to do something. There was I think it was a YouGov poll that came out in January. They polled Democrats. 46% said Democrats in Congress should oppose Trump as much as possible. 54 said find common ground, which I think is one of the more what the hell poll results I've seen in a long time. Now it's 65-35 opposed, clearly big shift. But is there, Joe, that leadership vacuum that we've got to be concerned about?
Yeah. Oh, look, there's definitely a leadership vacuum. And by the way, that's not necessarily leadership's fault. It's more a fault of our system. I mean, we elect these leaders. Most of them were trained. I mean, that was like the whole world they came up in was right working across the aisle, trying to get things done for people. That's not that's not an opposition to an authoritarian movement, right? I mean, that's not how Chuck Schumer or even Hakeem Jeffries. I mean, that wasn't, that's not how you get into the leadership in the House or the Senate. That's not the skill set necessarily. And so that's one thing. The second thing, though, is look, there's a lot of really excellent academic and sociological, all these people who've actually thought through or historic looks at how a democracy falls to an authoritarian. And the most striking thing to me was I saw a presentation by Ian Basson of Protect Democracy, which I'd like to get him on the pod if we can, in which basically I'll shortchange it a little bit, but the fundamental thing that leads to successfully opposing this or falling to it is how fast the opposition unifies behind one opposition leader. And he uses like the example of both Poland and Hungary. And yes, folks, we're on our way to being potentially one of those two situations. If where the opposition unified, put everything aside, differences on left, what shade of or wing they were in, but basically unified against the authoritarians. They have been able, like in Hungary, to kind of have a back and forth between authoritarianism and democracy, and can they get enough of an edge to actually gain enough democracy traction to pull back from the authoritarian threat? That's Poland, for instance. Okay. Hungary is where the opposition was sort of asleep, never really got its act together, never unified and around an opposition leader. The factions broke within the different wings of opposition, and Orban has consolidated, and over 5 elections, the opposition failed and is probably, Hungary's now Orban land. And so what comes from that is, whether you believe that's how far and how much trouble we're in, there are a lot of people who think that's where we're headed in between, that's the kind of fight we're in. If that's the fight we're in, we need to unify as an opposition. And that means Adam Kinzinger, it means everybody across beyond just the Democratic Party, but anybody, which means we have to accept that, we have to welcome them, and we have to fight Trump and Musk and all these people as a unified front. Interesting. How would you do that? And that's what I'm saying. Like, I'm not sure. Okay, so you put, Murphy becomes the leader of the Senate, whoever, pick Schatz, whoever you want, if you're talking about Schumer. That's okay, that's a step, but that's not going to do it. The interesting thing Ian brought up as a possible thing to do was to open up immediately the Democratic nomination for president, and say that and basically the DNC and the Democratic Party announces that we're not waiting till 2028. We're this year, by November, we're going to pick our nominee for president. and go through primaries, whatever, between, let's say, now and next April. I don't care. And in April, you hold a convention and you nominate our nominee for president of the United States. And we, all of us, unify. That's the opposition leader for 3 years, who can name members of his or her cabinet and shadow and fight these guys along with the legal and everything else. I thought that was a really fascinating. How do we become, because we don't have a, we don't have a, we're not in a parliamentary system. How do we fashion, how do we come to agreement now around a unified opposition leader? And I doubt very much that that would become, Schumer or Schatz or Hakeem, whether it would be possible for one of them, no matter how talented, for everybody to unify.
Well, they're also within the institutions, and they're beholden to the
Right. So you get Newsom, Whitmer, Westmore, whoever, Doug Jones. Oh, get them all out there running for, now in a, 6-month campaign for the nomination for the Democratic nomination for president. There's nothing in the law or anything. The choice of when and where to nominate your candidate is up to the party. It's not up to either the federal or state government. So I think that's a very interesting idea. And the only question really is are enough leaders in the party worried enough? I mean, get the threat, the urgency of this enough to actually contemplate doing something like that? Or do we all have to kind of create a movement to make that happen? Or at least, I know they're upset that we're all calling saying, do something. But maybe this is something they actually could and would do if people got into this idea. It hasn't been. Even Ian said in the presentation that this wasn't some idea that he thought was like, oh yeah, we should do this. It was more something. It's a thought of when you look at how you stop this stuff. There's the success has always been rallying around an opposition leader that unified everybody, the opposition. And in our system, the best way to do that may be to pick a nominee now. I mean, soon, within 6-9 months, and just that it's because the other important thing, and you've seen this, the thing that's happened because of fragmented media and everything is it's hard to get people's attention. That campaign, I mean, for the opposition to get attention, Trump, it's easy. Musk, it's easy. For us to have those 6, 7, 8 people out there with different ideas on how to take this on, and with their own message and narratives, that's going to get attention. The whatever primary that week is going to get attention, and whatever they're saying and it is going to get attention, and then that person is going to get attention. So I just think there's something there we should be thinking about.
Joe, I think that's actually a pretty good place for us to wrap today. We got plenty more to get to, but I know you don't want this. I know I don't want this. This show is not supposed to be a holy cow, look what Trump did this week, we got to panic. What we're focusing on and what we're going to continue focusing on this year is, like you've been talking about, the path forward, what we can do, put the ideas out there, see what can be picked up, see who wants to run with it. And that's a lot more fun, and I think a lot better place to be mentally too. So with that, Joe, I think you should probably bring us home.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. There's one thing I do want to talk about briefly, and that says us. It's sez.us. We are now in the Google App Store and the Apple App Store as well, which is pretty important because a lot of people, when we first launched it, said, okay, great, well, let me know when there's an app. Well, there are apps now. They're in the store. You can put them on Android or iOS iPhones. And I just want to say that the one thing I've been saying now for almost a year is we have to own and create our own networks. We cannot keep renting or building networks like X for VCs and others who are going to do it for fun and profit and an algorithm that destroys what we're all fighting for. I went out, I raised the money to start Says Us. Alex and I have been talking to people about, that's why our show is part of the Resolute Square, because we think We need to have media platforms like Resolute Square that starts to be a platform for other shows beyond ours, beyond Enemies List with Rick Wilson and others. But I really hope you'll take a look at and think about downloading the Says Us app at your app store and joining us there. Stay wherever you're at. Stay on X, Blue Sky, all of them. That's fine. But you can help build a pro-democracy social network and a pro-democracy information hub that we sorely need to take on the propaganda and this authoritarian threat. So I hope you will. Please subscribe to That Trippi Show and leave a review on Apple or wherever you listen. Also, if you're listening to this episode on YouTube, please like and subscribe to get alerts when we post the next episode. You can always send us a question to thattrippishow@gmail.com or leave us a question in a review on iTunes. We'll see you next week.